Friday, August the 25th, 1995.
From NBC News, this is Today with Bryant Gumbel and Katie Curran, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
A red-hot dispute between Beijing and Washington has cooled a bit with the release of human rights activist Harry Wu. Wu had been convicted of spying and given a 15-year jail sentence. This morning, he's back in the United States. More from NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell.
After 2 months in a Chinese jail, Harry Wu arrived in San Francisco, in pain from a bad back, exhausted, but grateful to be home.
I really appreciate all the people there. Thank you.
Despite the ordeal, the human rights activist will not give up his crusade.
I think they can only destroy a man, but I don't think they can defeat me.
Wu's release was a big relief for the White House.
Are you pleased about Wu?
Yeah.
It clears the way for Hillary Rodham Clinton to go to China for an international women's conference. Some China watchers believe that's exactly why Beijing let Wu go.
I think the main concern was the 35,000 women from around the world were breathing down their neck, and there was no telling, what might happen once they got to Beijing.
Even though her husband is free, Harry Wu's wife, CHING does not want people to forget China's human rights record.
Of course, I don't object Mrs. Clinton's going to Beijing, but I still hope that people should remember how terrible the human rights record in China.
Harry Wu's release will not solve the larger problems between the United States and China. In fact, some U.S. officials believe that if Mrs. Clinton now speaks out too forcefully on human rights, it could make the situation even worse. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, San Francisco.
Much on Close-Up this morning, our troubles with China. U.S.-Chinese relations at their worst level in 6 years may have improved slightly this week with China's release and expulsion of American human rights activist Harry Wu. Convicted as a spy, he was expelled from China and returned home to San Francisco last night. That drama has created a difficult atmosphere for a UN-sponsored international conference on women's issues that opens in Beijing on September 4th. Heading the U.S. delegation to that conference is Madeleine Albright, our ambassador to the United Nations. And this morning, she's at our Washington News Bureau. Madam Ambassador, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Matt.
Does the fact that the Chinese have expelled Harry Wu clear the hurdles, allowing Hillary Rodham Clinton to attend that conference in Beijing in early September?
Well, it sure makes it a lot easier. Getting Harry Wu released was one of our top priorities. We're obviously very pleased that he has come home. And I must say that if Mrs. Clinton were to decide to go, that it would be a great energizer for this conference. This conference is a very important one for more than half the people in the world, the women of the world.
So your personal opinion is that Mrs. Clinton should attend the conference?
Well, I have given my advice, but I really do think that what's important is that she's dedicated to the kinds of issues that we're going to be talking about at the conference. And I've been around when she's spoken at United Nations conferences to women representing all the countries in the world, and she just has a magic way of expressing the issues that are of such importance to all of us.
Madam Ambassador, I have to confess I'm a little confused by this. The Chinese held Mr. Wu against his wishes since June. They accused him of spying. They tried him, convicted him, and expelled him. Is that the kind of behavior that should be rewarded by a visit from the First Lady?
I don't think there's any quid pro quo here. The issue here is the following, is that Mr. Wu is someone that we know to be a great human rights activist. He was in China. They felt that they needed to follow through on their judicial processes, not something that we necessarily agree with, but our priority was for him to come home, and we're very pleased with that. And the conference, we have said all along, is a conference, a human rights conference. And it seemed kind of paradoxical to us not to go to a human rights conference for human rights reasons. So we're going to go there and state our case very clearly.
Let's take Harry Wu out of the equation for a second. Do you think the Chinese behavior in the past months on things like human rights and testing of nuclear weapons offshore warrants a visit from the First Lady?
I think that the issue here is clearly that there are problems in the U.S.-Chinese relationship. Undersecretary Tarnoff is in China to begin to deal with that. Secretary Christopher talked about it in Brunei. It is one of the issues that we would like to get resolved, to improve our relationship with China. I think The fact, first of all, let me say, Mrs. Clinton, that decision has not been made yet. But the issue here is that this is a conference that is very important to the women of the world, and that's something that Mrs. Clinton and all of us care about a great deal.
Ambassador Albright, let's turn to Iraq for a second. From information that's being gleaned from 2 Iraqi defectors recently, it's very clear that Saddam Hussein intended to use or was willing to use chemical and biological weapons against our troops during the Gulf War. It's also somewhat clear that many of those weapons have not been destroyed. What can we do about that?
Well, we're doing everything we can, and I must say that the firmness that the United States has shown in the United Nations, saying that they have to come clean on all these weapons of mass destruction, that is, tell us what they had and allow the United Nations system to make a complete verification, and then abide by the other Security Council resolutions, which have to do with returning Kuwaiti stolen property, accounting for Kuwaiti prisoners of war, stopping their support for terrorism, stopping repressing their own people. That is the firm line that the United States has taken to show that Iraq needs to do those things in order to not be sanctioned by the international community.
After the Iraqi defections, the United States did step up pressure to try and force the ouster of Saddam Hussein. It appears that that effort has failed to gain support in the other Arab nations. Is the opportunity lost?
I don't agree with your premise. What we have been doing is continuing on a very firm course that we have had all along, is to make sure that the international community understands the rogue behavior of Iraq and the necessity for them to abide by the rules and regulations that the international community has set up.
Right.
We feel very strongly about that.
Ambassador Madeleine Albright, we thank you for joining us this morning.